E.T. here. The Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul fight, an old champion versus a young upstart, it was not the first such questionable encounter. Back in 1820, Daniel Mendoza, former middleweight, heavyweight champion of the British Empire, and by implication, champion of the whole world, Mendoza, at the age of 57, fought Thomas Owen, himself a former champion, and younger than Mendoza by either a decade or 5 years. It depends on who's telling the story. Oh, and by the way, Owen is famous for inventing something that you probably consider essential for your own fitness training. So stay with me. Daniel Mendoza, in the late 1790s, now back here in the USA, George Washington is president. Mendoza reigned in England as middle and then heavyweight champion. And in 1820, he's still a legend in England when he comes out of retirement to meet Tom Owen. He's especially held in high regard by England's upper class. Mendoza even had meetings with King George III. That's the same George III who lost the war against the colonies. We call it here the American Revolution. But famous though Mendoza was, he's always in need of cash. He has a large family, and he owns a tavern. I think it's called the Admiral Nelson. Somebody check me out on that. Looking at Mike Tyson. Tyson was 1 year older than Mendoza was. And Tyson, is much heavier than the diminutive Mendoza, who at 5 feet 9 inches usually weighed around 160 pounds. And Mendoza's opponent, Owen, unlike Jake Paul, was closer in age to Mendoza than Paul was to Mike Tyson. Mendoza, unlike Mike Tyson, was no brawler, but rather he was among the first, perhaps the first, of the scientific boxers, who, unlike the barehanded sluggers that we read about in England at the time, unlike them, relied on the guard, the straight left jab, feints, and sidestepping to throw an opponent off, to make him miss. Well, that year, 1820, was witness to growing popularity of boxing, again, mostly in Great Britain, but also here in the USA. England is just a decade away from having actual official rules. Also happening in 1820, those former British colonies, known today as the USA, were enjoying the era of good feelings under President James Monroe. And in England, Herman Melville was garnering research material for his, in my opinion, virtually unreadable novel, Moby Dick. But for Londoners in 1820, and many boxing fans abroad, it was the return of Mendoza, like Mike Tyson's return, that was the big news. But as proved true for Iron Mike, Father Time rusted Mendoza's body. Here's what happened. Now, it's according to witnesses whose accounts are available in a book I'd like you to buy. Win Weldon wrote this book, The Fighting Jew, The Life and Times of Daniel Mendoza. And by the way, E.T. has no relationship, financial or otherwise, with any of these writers. I just want him to continue writing. So buy the book new. Anyway, the battle occurred on the 4th of July, 1820, on Banstead Downs. That's outside of London. We don't know how many attended, but it was reported that London's East End was completely drained of people. The combatants are fighting without gloves. They can do virtually anything, including throwing opponents, things forbidden today under the rules of Queensberry. These combatants are both too old. They're showing their ages, although Mendoza at first was thought to look pretty good for somebody his age. But looking good and being in shape are two different things. As to the fight, both Owen and Mendoza circle each other for some time. Then they begin to grapple and fall with the heavier Owen on top. Keep in mind, a round ends when somebody falls. In the second round, Mendoza lands a left, but again he falls under Owen. Later on, in a subsequent round, after an exchange of punches, Mendoza's eye is flowing, as one reporter put it, flowing claret. By the seventh round, Owen appears stronger. He's landing more. He lands a hard right to Mendoza's ear, followed by one of his famous Owen stops. What that is, Owen uses his open left hand to rub all over Daniel Mendoza's face, and while Mendoza is blinded, Owen follows by a hard right. In the ninth round, both men appear very winded. Mendoza's eye cuts are flowing on either side of his eye. Owen lands a hard kidney punch. He gets an arm lock on Mendoza's head, and now he's pummeling the former champion with his right. By round 12, Daniel Mendoza is finished. Well, looking at the aftermath of all this, the odds makers very unhappy. They had favored Mendoza. Win Weldon, in his book, speculates that maybe Mendoza simply underestimated his opponent, Owen, and at the same time overestimated his own abilities. We know he didn't train much. Whatever. Boxiana magazine reported this. Mendoza, in appearance, and I'm quoting, Mendoza, in appearance, is quite an altered man. As a pugilist, he could scarcely make a decisive hit, and his once fine science was looked for in vain. A Mendoza fan, identified only as D.W., wrote these words. It's a sonnet. Is this Mendoza? This the Jew of whom my fancy cherished so beautiful a waking dream? A vision which has perished. 16 years later, in 1836, Daniel Mendoza dies. He left his wife Esther, his family of 11 in poverty. Oh, regarding Tom Owen, that thing that he invented that you probably use. You know it today as the dumbbell. And that, boys and girls, is the story. Did you like it? Hit that thumb up icon. Write your comments in below. And do share these videos. You know the drill. Thank you.